Story 1. When he lost his job, 2 years later I began marking the calendar whenever he went to the casino while I was at work. The fact that I felt the need to do that was telling, and when I confronted him he flatly denied how often he went. He was going 3 to 4 times a week, and I later learned he was thousands of dollars in debt. I left. Story 2. When I called her out for using lies to cover her tracks, instead of owning up and apologizing, she hit me in the head with a metal water bottle. Story 3. He showed me pictures from his trip to Mexico. He goes there 3 months a year to see family. He scrolled past an album titled Mi Amor. It was not of me. We had been together 6 years. Story 4. If you were a real man, you would have hit me for flirting with him. Absolutely not. Story 5. When he proposed, I knew he didn't mean it when he asked, and I knew it didn't count when I said yes. We had been together for 6 years, and I was telling him I was unhappy that things had stagnated. It was one of many talks like that, and I was crying. He knelt down and asked me to marry him. I felt I had to say yes, so I did. But I knew in the moment it wasn't real. We cuddled for a few minutes before I said I didn't think he'd meant it. His response was, "Well, you kind of forced my hand." The whole thing felt so gross and so unfair. Nothing changed after that. We never talked about that moment again. I broke up with him a few months later. Story 6. I do not even remember what the argument was about anymore. But when he grabbed me by the throat in the car, that was the moment. There was no going back or moving forward from that. I quietly made my exit plans, called off the engagement, and left. That was the first escalation, and I do not doubt it would have escalated over the years if I had stayed. Story 7. His side of the conversation changed from "when we get married" to "when I get married." Story 8. He said he was unsure about marrying me and told me what I wanted to hear for almost 10 years. Story 9. When she asked me to bring her home fries after work, I stopped at McDonald's and got her 2 large fries. I came in with them. She took the bag, opened it, pulled out the fries, and threw them in the trash right in front of me. I was shocked and asked what was wrong. She said she wanted frozen fries and asked why I had even come over. This made me think about the past. There were many similar incidents I had brushed off. I realized that no matter what I did, she would resent me and be unhappy. Story 10. We were living together and very poor. One of our favorite bands, Big Sugar, came to town. We talked about it, but it was not in the budget. On Friday night, he was getting dressed to go out with the guys. "Where are you off to?" Big Sugar." "What?" "We talked about this and decided we could not afford to go." "Oh, we cannot, but I can." Story 11. I was hit by a distracted driver while we were each traveling over 50 miles per hour. He T-boned the front of my car at an angle, causing me to spin across several lanes of traffic and go backward into a steep ditch off a major highway. He was my emergency contact, and my iPhone immediately notified him of my potential accident and shared my location. He texted to ask if I was okay. I said I was not sure, that I had been hit at high speed, and asked him to come to the scene because I was very upset. He said he had just gone to his parents' house for a barbecue and that he would check in with me later. I had a concussion for 2 weeks and severe bruising. My dad came, and my concussed brain kept asking when my partner would arrive. My dad said, "Honey, he would not leave a barbecue after you were in a serious car accident. I do not think he is coming." I found out 2 months later that he had also been cheating on me for about 8 months. This all happened this year. Sometimes I still cannot believe it. We were together for 3.5 years. Story 12. I found a text he sent to his friend saying he saw no future with me. We had been together 4 years, and he had recently convinced me to leave my high-paying job to move to a small town for his career. Story 13. I went for a minor medical procedure, and my gut told me that listing him as my emergency contact wasn't the right choice. Story 14. He mocked the fact that my father walked out on us when I was 8. Story 15. I left town for 2 weeks on a trip through the wilderness. I missed her like crazy and thought about how great it would be to see her when I got back. As soon as I got home, I called her and the first thing she said was, "Oh wow, I did not think about you at all. It really hurt, but it was the wake-up call I needed for that terrible relationship." Story 16. This thread makes me sad. I am sorry for all the people who have had to deal with awful exes. Story 17. When I poured my heart out to her, talking about the things I was passionate about, she looked at me and said she was bored with a self-amused look, as if she thought she was being cute. Story 18. During an argument, he punched a hole in the closet door, then went to a liquor store and provoked someone who struck him over the back of the head with a bottle, causing a serious head injury. He was absolutely insufferable. He refused ambulance treatment, refused to let me take him to the emergency room, and refused further ambulance care. He had a splitting headache for days. After about 6 days, he finally agreed to go to the emergency room, where doctors diagnosed a skull fracture. When he was discharged, he needed around-the-clock observation for 2 weeks, but I had a job and a child, so I could not provide that care. I called his mother, who came and took him. When he returned, I had packed all of his belongings into his van and he moved out. I was firm. Story 19. There was a lot of cheating during pregnancy, which should have been the wake-up moment, but I was knee-deep in a mental health crisis and could not see the forest for the trees, let alone evaluate the longevity of my relationship with the father of my child. The real moment of clarity came 10 days postpartum. I was recovering from an emergency cesarean section after a traumatic 36-hour labor, the most pain I had ever experienced. He was out running errands, and I asked him to grab me a coffee. He said it was out of his way and he could not. I was shocked. An hour later, he walked in with a gas station coffee, and I remember thinking that he had pulled through. It was not the best coffee, but the thought counted. I was wrong. It was a coffee he had purchased for himself. In that moment, I realized I was not even a person to this man. He did not see my humanity or care for me in the slightest. He said he wanted to marry me, but he could not even get me a coffee under those circumstances because it would require him to go 5 minutes out of his way. Story 20. She kept leaving town. I soon realized she was preparing to leave permanently. Story 21. He told me he didn't want me to go to a concert for a band we both liked because he was taking his new girlfriend and didn't want there to be any issues. That's how I found out we weren't exclusive. I broke up with him immediately. About 2 years later, we met by chance and he cried about how unhappy he was with her, how much he missed me, and how, even though they lived together, he slept on the couch. Story 22. When my mother took her last breath in front of me, I was distraught. Among many other bad things, I lost my friend group, my family acted like vultures over my mother's estate, and my father made shady moves that I am nearly certain were intended to stress my mother and hasten her death. I poured it all out to my girlfriend at the time, and she told me I was too much to deal with. She did not give me a choice. She suddenly cut herself out of my life and completely ghosted me while I was arranging the funeral and other post-death particulars. Story 23. A friend told me that it has been a year that I have heard you tell the same stories, rants, and complaints about him. I do not tire of you, my friend, but do you not tire of repeating yourself? Will you be saying the same words in 6 months, 6 years, or 16 years? Story 24. She chose alcohol over me. She was hospitalized with liver failure for the 3rd time. I packed my belongings and left. I have been alcohol-free for 423 days. Story 25. He hyped my birthday present for a month, but it was a $12 pair of red-framed sunglasses from Target. We had been together for 7 years, and when he asked if he should make a huge decision, I thought he meant an engagement ring. He was actually asking me implicitly whether he should cheat on me. He was evil. Story 26. 1. He punched the wall beside my face and kept shouting in public. 2. When I cried, he told me to stop acting. 3. He messaged several women on Instagram and flirted with them. 4. I listened to him talk about things I was only remotely interested in and tried to understand, giving him my full attention. When I spoke, it felt like he was only waiting for me to stop so he could talk, with no follow-up questions. 5. He left me in the middle of the road at night during an argument, and I had to go home alone. 6. He asked if I slept with my manager because I dressed well for the office. When I felt more scared and anxious than happy or excited at the thought of our wedding day, that was when I knew. Story 27. When I found out he had additional social media accounts with the uncropped versions he had sent me, I realized he did not go on a road trip with just the boys. Story 28. His hand was around my neck. He choked me until blackness gathered at the edges of my vision, and I wondered if I would ever see my parents again. When he let go and oxygen flooded my brain, all I could think was that I could never excuse this, and the moment it was safe I would leave him. Story 29. I realized I had had enough of never being enough for her. It has only been 4 months, and it still hurts like crazy. We had just celebrated our 5-year anniversary in April. Story 30. He would constantly tell me, "We all have options," to scare me into silence when I raised something I thought needed to be discussed in our relationship. After the 3rd time, I realized he was right. I did have an option, to find a man who wasn't a piece of shit. Story 31. He told me that his family members all married their cousins and argued with me that this produced offspring with higher intelligence quotients. Story 32. We swung by a friend's house, and he was showing off a pretty anniversary ring he had bought his wife. He turned to me in front of everyone and said, "Don't you ever think you were getting something like that?" That was the moment I realized a man who loves me would not say things like that to make me feel small. Story 33. I was sexually assaulted and I couldn't tell him or talk about it because I knew he would twist it into my fault or see it as me cheating. I didn't tell anyone. In that realization, I knew it was over. Story 34. He got married to someone else. We never dated. I was just in love. I know he felt something too, but he was already in a relationship when we met. Story 35. We were talking about his night. He had a friend over to hang out. Him. My friend got pretty drunk. Me. So is he crashing at yours tonight? Him. No, he drove home. Me. Wait. You let him drive home drunk? Him. I am not on the road. What do I care? I was speechless. I realized then that, yes, this man was very attractive but cold inside. Zero empathy. He would have happily stayed with me permanently too. But 3 weeks after I ended our 3.5-year relationship, he was with another person. I literally meant nothing to him. Story 36. I realized he did not want to go through the hard things with me. Over our 10-year relationship, I made excuses for his behavior and justified how he failed to support me. The last straw was when I became sick and needed help, and he did not show up. He told me I should have just asked even though I had because he would rather play video games. It finally dawned on me that my struggles were an inconvenience to him and I would never be a priority. I told him I was done and packed my things the next day. It was the best decision I ever made. Story 37. When I took her to a movie that I had wanted to see for several years, the only thing she said afterward was, "We don't have a lot of things in common." Story 38. Her parents caught us mid-elopement in the backyard, just as her dog, draped in a scarf, was about to officiate. 50 stuffed animals looked on as witnesses, their button eyes filled with silent judgment. Before we could seal the deal, her mom called, "Hey, come inside. It's time for lunch." So we abandoned our vows, switched gears, and spent the afternoon playing pirate and princess. We never returned to that wedding day. The magic was one time only. Story 39. Small fights began to last longer and required less provocation. She was no longer particularly eager to make up. Basically, she had stopped trying. Story 40. When I cried because he did nothing for my birthday or Valentine's Day, he ignored me and watched thirst traps on TikTok as I sobbed beside him in bed. When I asked him why he was constantly lying to me, he replied, "Well, there are no consequences, so." Story 41. Long story, but it was really after he tackled me in the woods during a fight on my birthday. He convinced me to go home with him, trapped me in his car, and refused to drive me home because he knew I was planning to leave. I did not say so, but we both knew. I had to threaten to jump out of a moving vehicle for him to take me home, and he made me promise to go into the house with him. I kept that promise. As I looked at him sitting on the bed, it finally hit me that it was over. We dated for 1 more month, and it was horrible. He threw the engagement ring at me and punched everything during one of our last fights. Story 42. After I told him over the phone that I had a fun time hanging out with a friend, he said, "After I kill myself, you and him can just get married." I thought he was joking. We had been together for almost 7 years and were engaged. He then insisted. He knew I had a crush on the friend, even though I did not, and said he was serious. I began crying and asking why he would say that. The year that followed was the most extreme psychological abuse I have ever endured, and it permanently changed my life. Story 43. She walked out the moment I told her I had liver cancer. Her circle of women told her she deserved better than a sick partner. When I went into remission, she tried crawling back. Story 44. The moment she said, "I like fights. Without fights and drama, life is too boring," I thought, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I took my long-term goal of being peaceful with myself and got the fuck out of there. Story 45. I was happier without him. My personality was more open and carefree, and I could be myself for those few moments. Since I left 12 years ago, I have discovered who I am and what I need. I met a wonderful man I cannot imagine being away from. Find a partner you hate being away from instead of someone you look forward to being away from. Story 46. He kept nagging me for sex until I gave in or began crying. I told him it felt like he was trying to force me and that he had to stop. I discussed it with him several times. Once he said it was difficult for him, that it was a learning experience, and that I had to cut him some slack for a couple of mistakes. I gave up. No one should need multiple tries to learn not to pressure someone into sex. Story 47. One day, after nearly 3 years, I turned around and realized I had no other friends, while he still had all of his. Story 48. I realized with my previous boyfriend that he would not become my husband because he did not reciprocate my efforts or consider my options. Our goals were too different and we were not compatible. Story 49. I dated a woman who turned into a beast when she was hungry. It happened often. Right after eating, she would be fine. She would say things like, "Wow, I feel so much better now." When I pointed out the correlation between being hangry and the difficulties it caused, she refused to see it and rejected the idea that hunger caused the change. I knew she was a complete moron, and it would never work out. Story 50. When she told me she had changed her mind and wanted to have children, it marked the beginning of the end. Our differences and how much we had grown apart over the years became clearly evident in the ensuing arguments, and our visions for the future could not have been more opposed. Story 51. When the intimacy was gone, I did not just mean sex, although he had even stopped wanting that. I mean little touches here and there, a kiss or a hug when he got home from work. We had a rule: always kiss each other goodnight. If I did not hug or kiss him during the day, that goodnight kiss was the only physical affection I would get. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids together, and I realized that sometimes that happens. I tried being the one to initiate sex and cuddles, but the constant rejection hurt. What finally ended things for me, though it may seem insignificant, was one night when I asked for a foot rub. I had been on my feet all day, and when I finally had a minute to sit down, I was mentally drained from working on an essay outline that was due the next day. I just wanted a short foot rub. He said no. I asked why, and he said, "Because I don't want to." As I was making his lunch for work before I went to bed, I realized it was not fair. I had always tried. I would massage his back when he was sore. I made his lunch every day. I never denied him physical affection. I made dinner every night, plated and served the food, and did all the cleaning. All I wanted was some affection, but he would not give that to me. I had spoken to him about these issues multiple times. I realized that the man who at one point would do anything for me, who thought I had hung the moon and treated me like absolute gold, was not that man for me anymore. I do not know why. Maybe he thought that because we had kids, he did not need to maintain the relationship because I would never leave. Maybe he was no longer in love with me. Maybe he was cheating. When I asked, he could not give me a reason. I did not want a platonic marriage or a roommate. I called off the engagement, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. We do love each other, and we co-parent well now. We are even friends. But he will never be my husband. Story 52. I realized she would always choose drinking over me. Once, during the years we were together, I asked her to stop, and she did. The other nights, she did not care. Story 53. The night before I was going to propose, She called and said through tears, "I need you to know that if you ask me to marry you, I will have to say no." That was only the start of the realization. Over the next week, she divulged how years earlier she had been abducted and sexually abused, such that she could not have children, though she wanted kids. Understandably, there was a lot of unprocessed trauma. Whether it was because of that or other things, she admitted that for as much as she valued our friendship, she couldn't bring herself to feel the kind of attraction that warrants a wedding. She had wanted to reveal all this earlier but could never discern the right moment or find the courage. Now, with the potential for marriage on the immediate horizon, it all became overwhelming for her. For 3 months, I held out hope that counseling would fix things, or that she'd have a sudden change of heart, like in movies. Sadly, she was just nowhere near ready. One day, while I was cooking soup and talking to her on the phone, she told me that she hoped we could stay friends forever, but that she didn't see us ever marrying. I told her that I couldn't be around her and not stay in love, so it was better to go our separate ways. Even as I said it, I realized the soup had been boiling over for some time. I think that was when I accepted it was the end. I hung up the phone and wept for an hour. It was as if an immense mosaic was being shaken to the floor by an earthquake. Innumerable expectations and dreams were splintered and scattered, each fragment reflecting a future now lost. I understood immediately that rebuilding, if it ever came, would take time, but my image of life would never quite resemble the one I had imagined. 15 years later, I am glad to say I am married. My wife and I have 3 children and a great life. I'm pleased to say the woman I had been with got help and eventually married a young widower who lost his wife to cancer. The man had 1 or 2 little kids, so she gets to be a mom like she dreamed of. In hindsight, more good has likely come from the breakup than would have from our union. This in turn has helped me to receive adversity and sorrow as potential stepping stones on life's path. Instead of being frozen by despair, experience has convinced me to wait for goodness yet unseen. Many years have passed, yet I still love the first woman. Not in the same way or with the naivete of my early 20s, but I harbor an ardent goodwill toward her, wherever she is, and I remain grateful for what we had. Some mornings when I am seated outside, birds alight on the table in front of me. After they have rested for a moment, they fly off and I never see them again. The love one shares with another does not entitle the lover to the beloved, or else love would be a cage. Love is a resting place we afford to others for as long as they need. It is a table we offer to weary wanderers before bidding sincere farewells. Edit. I awoke to find this is my most upvoted comment ever. I'm so glad I could connect with everyone. Believe me, it was not my aim to make a bunch of you cry. On a lighter note, a few of you asked what kind of soup it was and whether I ate it. For stylistic purposes, I omitted those details. The fact is that it was beef ramen and I ate it very sadly. It was not a good look. But one does not waste good soup. To the people wondering if, given the chance, I'd prefer to be married to the first woman, the answer is no. My wife and I are a much better long-term match, but I could not have known that then. Some called my ending self-indulgent fart-sniffing fit for young adult fiction. Since they clearly know the genre, I'll gladly send advanced copies of my posts for their expert review. If my expressiveness stirs even a wisp of emotion in these empathetic husks, I'd consider it a triumph. After all, to provoke scorn from the emotionally inert is no small feat. Story 54, 4 years. The way he treated my new kitten like competition reminded me of something I had been told. A lot of domestic violence starts or worsens when a woman is pregnant or has just had a baby, because the abuser suddenly has competition for her affection. There were many other red flags, but that was the last nail in the coffin. I could no longer trust that he would not become violent with me. Story 55. I told her I was never going to have children. She said we would cross that bridge when we came to it. Story 56. I am going to mention a couple of exes. The first was when I realized he would never get his act together. The second was a different man who had a toxic relationship with his parents. He told them absolutely everything about our relationship, including the type of birth control I used. They told me they did not approve of my birth control because they wanted grandchildren, but at the same time they did not want him to have children with me because of my mental health struggles. I am so glad I got out of that situation. Fortunately, I am now in a healthy, loving relationship with my fiancé. I see myself spending the rest of my life with him, and I could not be happier. He is all green flags. Story 57. We dated 4 years, broke up for a year, and then got back together for a 5th year. During that year, I worked hard to achieve many of my dreams and to gain more independence. One day we were talking about what I had accomplished, and I said, I always said I was going to do this. And he replied, I know, but I never thought you would actually do it. At that moment, I realized we were not going to stay together and that I instinctively knew he did not expect me to pursue my dreams. That is why I ended things with him the first time. Story 58. When we were waiting for a musical to start, I jokingly asked him, if I were to make a Broadway musical called Transformers, what would you look for? He shot me down, said it was a horrible idea, and made me feel ashamed to be creative. I realized he was trying to shape me into his idea of a wife and dumped him the next day. Story 59. She said she did not feel loved or supported. Even though I had done everything in my power to love and support her, I was exhausted, and she did not listen when I tried to explain. When she ended it, I let it happen. She was angry that I did not fight to keep her. I had nothing left to give. Story 60. We were at my parents' house and had a heavy snowfall overnight. In the morning, I went out to help my mom shovel. He sat on our couch on his phone for almost 2 hours while my mom and I shoveled. He had winter clothes with him and we had extra shovels. I asked if he wanted to help, and he just said no. It did not bother his conscience in the slightest to see my mother and me working outside while he played Angry Birds. I was not angry. It is not his house or his driveway. He was a guest. But I knew then that our sense of care, duty, and responsibility did not align and that we had an expiration date. Edit. Many of you are very upset that someone might not want to be in a relationship with a person who does not recognize when they should help others without being explicitly told. Those who protest strongly may be protesting too much. Story 61. I didn't answer his call at 11:30 p.m. He sent me 20 text messages, calling me names, being defensive even though I had not said anything, and being self-deprecating. Not charming, confident, or graceful. Next. Story 62. She was way too old for me, did not even know I existed, and then she married Michael Douglas. Story 63. He said to me, what's wrong with you is that your mom had the twins too soon after you, and she wasn't able to teach you how to be a lady. Who the hell thinks up something like that and says it out loud? Story 64. He didn't keep his toilet clean. It was nasty and grimy. He acted like a teenager despite being in his mid-20s. Story 65. Lies are becoming more frequent and more significant. Where was that heading? Story 66. When he said one person will always love the other more in a relationship, I realized I was the one who loved more. You are not wrong, but he left me feeling like he always had one foot out the door, and he kept proving it. Still breaks my heart. Story 67. He would never walk with me. He always stayed ahead. It started subtly, with him downplaying my feelings and telling me I was just sensitive and needy. Over time it escalated like a frog in boiling water and eventually became violent. I am lucky to have left. Listen to your gut. Do not let someone tell you what you need, and do not stay after they hit you. Story 68. He stopped talking to me out of nowhere. We had grown so close, and it was my first heartbreak. Story 69. I found out he was having sex with his ex-girlfriend, whom he had lived with when he said he wanted to take a break. Story 70. She told me she would rather be remembered as attractive than as a good person. Goodbye. Story 71. I had a gut feeling all along, but I overlooked it because I loved him and he had many good qualities despite the problems. The turning point was when I told him how unhappy I was with the relationship and his behavior, and 2 days later he tried to get me to look at engagement rings. I realized he was content with our miserable life and wanted to protect it, while I wanted to improve it. I also felt he was trying to buy my silence about the real problems we were having. When we broke up, I told one of his friends, who asked, that part of the issue was that I couldn't see us getting married given how unhappy we both were. I couldn't imagine another year of that. let alone the rest of our lives. The friend heard this as me breaking up with him because he hadn't proposed, and then tried to get us back together by telling me my ex had been planning to propose and telling my ex that I had been frustrated waiting for a proposal. Story 72. Honestly, I think it was just a gut feeling because deep down I knew I did not want to marry him. I did not pester him about getting married or having children, even after being together for 5 years. He showed no initiative to propose and did none of the things he said he would need to do before getting married. It bothered me, but not as much as it should have. I am married to someone now, and I am so glad it turned out the way it did. I cannot imagine being with anyone else. Story 73. When he told me that fat did not suit me after I started gaining weight due to antidepressants and undiagnosed Hashimoto disease. Story 74. She really wanted children but was unable to look after herself. She was always late and overpacked for flights. I had never missed a flight until I met her. If she cannot care for herself, she cannot care for children. I already knew I would have to be the breadwinner, so I could not see myself doing all the cooking, housework, and childcare as well. It was not going to be a partnership. Story 75. We went to Disney every Christmas with her family. I am visually impaired and need help getting through crowds. She left me in the park and walked off, leaving me to fend for myself after another argument over lunch. Her mother had to take my hand so we could get back to the car. I knew it was over after that. Story 76. I realized too late they should never have been there. After I split my head open at work, when the men asked if they should call my husband, I answered, "No. He will be mad you woke him up." I was serious, and later realized how sad it was that I said it matter of fact. Story 77. We had been seeing each other for about 4 months when I mentioned a certain musician and she said, "Oh my God, I love him." I tried to continue, talking about a song he was on, and she stopped me, saying, "No, I would marry him." As her boyfriend, I told her that was a dumb and hurtful thing to say. She agreed, apologized, and said she was just a longtime fan. I dropped it. He was actually famous anyway, so who cares? A year later, we moved in together, not because it was ideal but out of necessity. A few months later, she mentioned the same musician was doing a concert in a nearby city, about a 30-minute drive, and she wanted to go. I'm not a fan of him like that, and I'm not a fan of concerts in general, so I declined but encouraged her to go with friends who were fans. She kind of brushed it off and kept talking about it, then casually said she hoped she would be called backstage to have sex so she could have his children. I was kind of in shock. She had never talked like that or been that spiteful. I was also dumbfounded because it was such an odd hill for either of us to die on after almost 2 years together. I think my exact words were something like, "Yeah? Are you kidding me, or are you just that out of it?" That got a worse response. We broke up but had to live together for another month or so. Not fun. You live and you learn, I guess. Story 78. I was widowed in my 40s. I dated a bit and then I met her. It was intense and moved quickly. It took a while to notice the little things. Avoiding true intimacy, for example, no eye contact during sex, no substantive conversations, and no planning for the future. We were engaged with no date set. 3 years in, I asked why she had dated Keith for 12 years but never married or had children. I had met him. He was a decent man who married not long after they split up. She said he was not the right guy. I asked if he was not the right guy, why did you stay so long? She said he was convenient. A few months after we split, I met my now wife, and I am the happiest man on the planet. Story 79. A few years in, she used me as a punching bag, maybe once a week. She was half my size, so the abuse was more emotional than physical. After I realized she might do the same to our children, I lost any investment I had in the relationship. Story 80. We were together for 15 great years, and then it ran its course. Story 81. I realized he has main character syndrome and treats everyone in his life as an obstacle or as someone he can manipulate to his advantage. Story 82. When I noticed she had a cock eye, it meant she was attracted to another guy's cock. Story 83. 2 instances. 1. I pursued a girl for too long. She would lead me on and then cut me off. I eventually found out she was having an affair with a married man. She then said the reason she would not date me was that she found me ugly and repulsive. I told her to leave me alone. For a year, she kept saying she wanted to be friends. I eventually had to hire a lawyer and threaten her with a restraining order. 2. I dated a girl while living abroad. On our second anniversary, I said we should start talking about marriage. Her response was, "I haven't even told my parents about you." I broke up with her a few months later. Story 84. I didn't see a point in dressing up. It all felt like a waste of money and effort. I felt worthless and didn't like myself in that relationship anymore. Story 85. When we were in a long-distance relationship, though not for the whole time, I asked him to come live with me, have a registry office wedding because of his traditional parents, and said I could support him for 2 months on my salary. He was in a dead-end job. He said he did not want to leave his hometown because all his friends were there. I asked if he thought they would stay for him. He stayed. Took me another year or two to work it all out and end things. Fast forward a couple more years and we caught up, with not too many hard feelings. I asked how his friends were. He told me they had all moved away. I raised my eyebrows. Story 86. We realized how much daycare would cost if we mailed in the marriage certificate. Story 87. When I found out he had lied about everything I knew about him, including his name, he told me I was overreacting and that I like arguing. I have known him for almost half a year. Story 88. During a 1-week solo vacation, I did not miss him at all and felt free and happy for the first time in years. Story 89. My ex-fiancé and I thankfully never tied the knot or made any announcements. We had been in a rough patch for a long time, and I discovered he was also having a paranoid episode and refused any treatment or even to acknowledge it. I later learned he had proposed to me solely because he needed a tool to keep me with him, and he routinely used the engagement to isolate me. He wanted my family to be excited when I told them who I would marry, and he made me feel guilty for thinking about leaving by reminding me that we were supposed to get married and by listing the dreams I had foolishly shared with him about our future. He even pushed me to go to work while I was symptomatic and waiting for coronavirus test results, knowing I worked in a nursing home. That caused a massive coronavirus outbreak that led to multiple deaths. All because he wanted to be home alone to FaceTime an ex. He treated my animals poorly, and I am still angry at myself for allowing it. The final straw came when the dog we got together stood between my legs and growled at him as he got up to approach me. She had never liked him but had always been sweet and loving. So seeing her become my protector was the eye-opener. I realized how miserable I would be with him, so I left that night. Story 90. I called my dear friend C and told him. My ex-partner got mad at me, grabbed me by the neck and called me a bitch, and I kind of forgot about it immediately, dissociating, not like I forgot my wallet, and then I remembered and wanted to call and tell you. In the saddest voice, he said, "That's what you said the 2 times. That was when I realized what was happening to me." Story 91. I had horrible stomach cramps and diarrhea twice while we were shopping for engagement rings. It turns out my body was smarter than my brain. Story 92. My ex was sitting on the edge of the bed next to me and showed me that he had a handgun. He wanted me to hold it. I refused. He then pointed it, supposedly jokingly, at my head. I told him to put it down. He laughed and said it was not loaded, but I insisted he put it down. He pulled the trigger while the gun was aimed point blank at my face. It was not loaded. In hindsight, I wish I had done something, but I was young and naive. Story 93. People began asking when we would get married, and I thought that was an insane idea. He was a giant man-child who could barely take care of himself. Story 94. I realized how bad her anxiety about everything was. We went to a show with a plan for escape if she got overwhelmed. Within 5 minutes, she had sprinted out the door and driven herself home. I was not angry because we had planned for that and public transit was an easy alternative. The next day, she revealed that she had gone to the site of one of our early dates and cried, imagining that I had chosen to hook up with someone cooler than her. That was the moment I realized we were not going to be together much longer. But the fact she thought I was cool enough to pull that off flattered me, so we stayed together another month. Story 95. He strangled me until I lost consciousness. Luckily, security arrived. Story 96. After 6 years, I confronted her and asked why we could not live together. She said her parents would not approve of me because I worked in a casino and she was a nurse. She had become a nurse because my casino salary had put her through school and had paid for 6 years of vacations. Story 97. At a birthday celebration, after 4 years of an on-and-off relationship, he was angry because I refused a ring as a birthday gift. I asked him when he was going to propose. He replied, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, maybe. We'll see how I feel. I decided to end it for good. Story 98. Someone asked when we were going to get married, and I felt physically ill. Story 99. When my mother was diagnosed with stage 5 metastatic breast cancer, I went to her house every day to make sure she was eating and taking her medicine. My girlfriend at the time was angry that I spent so much time with my dying mother. 2 months after my mother's diagnosis, I broke up with her. She was supposed to join my family, not force me to choose between caring for my mother and being with my girlfriend. For months later, my mother died. I had been with my girlfriend for 2 years before my mother's diagnosis. I have not had a real relationship since, just a handful of dates and a couple of friends with benefits. That was a little over 8 years ago. Story 100. My grandmother had died suddenly and I was in shock. My now ex-partner came over 2 days after the funeral and started screaming at me because I did not want to go clubbing that night. He forced me to go. I spent the entire night trying to hold it together while people told me to go home, and he yelled at me for crying when I finally broke. He screamed at me in front of everyone for an hour. I was too broken to leave him at that point, but I knew marriage was off the table for me. After that, he began lying about many things, and I kept catching him. Then he cheated and I finally left. I wish I had done it 2 years sooner. Story 101. I was having a somewhat rough period, and one evening I told her I wasn't happy with how things were. I clearly explained that being together was the only thing that made me happy. I remember hoping she would hug me, but she moved away, looked at me as if I were sick, and said I should talk to someone. Then she went to sleep at her place. Story 102. Reading all of these comments as a single person, remembering not to do any of this. Story 103. He told me his parents were still paying his phone bill, and he wanted us to move into a 2-bedroom apartment so his mother could live with us. Story 104. He and I were traveling the Sea to Sky Highway to Whistler. I looked over at him and had a premonition that one day I would be making that trip with someone else. There was no animosity and nothing was wrong in the relationship. I knew in that moment he would not be my husband. He was not. I married a different man and have been happily married for nearly 15 years. Story 105. He cheated on me on our anniversary and then dumped me by text. He later married the woman he had cheated with. He turned out to be a terrible husband, and she and I are friends now. It turned out he had lied to her and made me sound unhinged. Story 106. We have completely separate lives, but we have a great time when we go on vacation, and I'm fine with that. Not sure why he said it so enthusiastically. Story 107. I am not very religious. She is. We discussed religion over lunch, and when I asked questions to understand her point of view, she interpreted them as an attack on her beliefs or an attempt to disprove them. I only wanted to understand her. Story 108. They texted me twice after I had surgery. Once on the day of surgery to ask how it went, and once a couple of days later. I had a 2.5-week recovery and did not hear from them for almost 2 weeks. I texted several times but stopped when they did not respond. I also used Snapchat only to communicate with them and saw their stories showing they were out with other people, so they were clearly ignoring me. Story 109. The effort started to feel one-sided, and I was the only one trying to keep things together. Story 110. She told me she loved me but was not in love with me after a day of searching for and paying for parts for her car, and returning to find everything I owned packed and ready to be loaded into my car because she did not need me anymore. We lived together. I helped her children with homework, drove them to school, and drove her to work. I was head over heels. I was dumped like trash. It took a long time to make sense of it and to let my heart let her go. But there was no going back. Story 111. I got a new passport. I did not list them as my emergency contact and next of kin because I knew the passport would last longer than the relationship. Story 112. His mother called me a whore and he got mad at me for being upset. Story 113. When a coworker calls me to ask about public transit information, it becomes an event that almost ended our relationship. Her cheating with at least 3 men is not something we should throw our relationship away over. Story 114. Everyone uses their partner's wrongdoing as an example, so I'll be different and share mine. I made the conscious choice not to see her worth no matter what she did right. Story 115. He ignored me while I was having a seizure so he could play a video game. Story 116. I forgave him for all sorts of inconsiderate behavior. For years, I believed his lies that covered up his actions. We were finally living together after being long distance for 4 years. One night, I woke up and he wasn't in bed next to me. He had fallen asleep at his desk with his messages open, where he was having a secret relationship with a man. Story 117. We had been dating for 4 years. When I imagined him proposing, my heart sank and I felt a sense of dread. I figured this could not be a good sign. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.